Chief Warrant Officer Kira, Shadowfax, Vasquez had seen enough frozen pilots in her 12 years of service to recognize the look immediately. Captain James Morrison sat motionless in the Apache's cockpit, his breathing shallow and irregular, staring at the helmet-mounted display she'd just finished calibrating. The HUD flickered with targeting data from her previous mission, data that should have been wiped clean hours ago. "Sir," she called from the maintenance ladder, her voice cutting through the humid Afghan air. "The system's ready for your pre-flight check." Morrison didn't respond. His gloved hands trembled against the collective, and she could see the reflection of her combat footage playing across his visor. Frame by frame, the ghostly green imagery revealed what she'd done 3 nights ago over the Korangal Valley, a precision strike that had turned the tide of a desperate firefight, but at a cost that still haunted her dreams. She'd been alone that night, flying a damaged bird with failing hydraulics and a cracked canopy, responding to a distress call from a pinned-down reconnaissance team. The mission parameters had been simple: extract the team before Taliban reinforcements arrived. What the footage showed was anything but simple. The mechanics in the hangar had stopped their work, drawn by Morrison's sudden stillness. Staff Sergeant Rico Delgado, her crew chief, climbed up beside her, his weathered face creased with concern. "What's got the captain spooked, Chief?" Kira's jaw tightened. The footage shouldn't have been there. She'd filed her after-action report, submitted to the mandatory psychological evaluation, and received clearance to return to duty. But somehow, the most classified moments of that night had survived in the Apache's memory banks, moments that revealed the true nature of her call sign and why half the base treated her like a ghost. "Turn it off," Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible over the idling turbines of nearby aircraft. But Kira knew it was too late. He'd seen enough. The precision of her shots, the calculated risks, the way she'd turned a crippled helicopter into an instrument of surgical destruction while under heavy fire. He'd witnessed what happened when someone pushed Shadowfax too far. The afternoon sun beat down on the flight line, casting long shadows across the tarmac. In the distance, the mountains of eastern Afghanistan loomed like silent sentinels, holding secrets that would soon spill into the open. Morrison finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else she couldn't quite identify. "How?" was all he managed to say. Kira stepped down from the ladder, her boots hitting the concrete with finality. The real story was about to begin, whether she wanted it or not. The footage had opened a door she'd spent years keeping locked, and now there would be questions. Questions about that night, about her methods, and about why the most dangerous pilot in the squadron had been relegated to maintenance duty. The investigation began before sunrise. Colonel Patricia Hayes arrived at Bagram Airfield with a team of intelligence officers and a reputation for extracting truth from the most classified operations. Word had spread quickly through the base. Something about Shadowfax's footage had triggered protocols that reached all the way to the Pentagon. Kira found herself in Interrogation Room C by 600, facing a woman whose silver hair and steely gaze suggested decades of military experience. The room smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic tension, its bare walls offering no comfort or distraction from the weight of the moment. "Chief Warrant Officer Vasquez," Colonel Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "The footage recovered from Apache Tail number 9100666 shows events that don't align with your official after-action report." Kira kept her expression neutral, though her heart rate quickened. She'd known this day would come eventually. The Korangal mission had been too clean, too perfect for a pilot supposedly operating a damaged aircraft under impossible conditions. "Ma'am, I reported the mission exactly as it occurred." Hayes slid a tablet across the metal table. The screen showed frozen frames from the HUD footage, thermal imagery of Taliban positions being eliminated with surgical precision, each shot timed to the millisecond, each maneuver executed with an expertise that bordered on the supernatural. 17 confirmed kills in 12 minutes, Chief. Flying a bird with compromised hydraulics and limited ammunition. The physics alone should have made this impossible. Hayes leaned forward. Yet here we are, looking at footage that suggests you performed combat maneuvers that would challenge our most experienced pilots in perfect aircraft. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Outside the small window, Kira could see the maintenance crews beginning their daily routines, unaware that their colleague was being dissected by military intelligence. She'd always known her skills set her apart, but she'd never intended for them to become a liability. "Ma'am, sometimes adrenaline and training converge in unexpected ways," she said carefully. Hayes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Adrenaline doesn't explain the precision targeting we see here. Training doesn't account for the tactical innovations you employed. And neither explains why you've been assigned to maintenance duty despite being one of the most capable pilots in theater." The colonel's words hung in the air like an accusation. Kira realized that Hayes already knew more than she was letting on. This wasn't an investigation. It was an interrogation designed to extract a confession she wasn't ready to give. "I was grounded after the psychological evaluation, ma'am. Standard protocol after a high-stress engagement. The psychological evaluation that recommended you for immediate return to combat status." Hayes consulted her notes. "The one that praised your mental resilience and tactical acumen. That evaluation, Chief." Kira's carefully maintained composure began to crack. Someone had been watching her, studying her, perhaps for longer than she'd realized. The maintenance assignment hadn't been punishment, it had been containment. The truth emerged in fragments over the following days, pieced together through interviews with personnel who'd worked with Kira throughout her career. Staff Sergeant Delgado was the first to break, his loyalty to his crew chief finally overcome by the weight of official inquiry. "She's not like the others, Colonel," he admitted during his session, his calloused hands fidgeting with his garrison cap. "Been working with pilots for 23 years, and I've never seen anyone who could read an aircraft like Chief Vasquez. It's like she becomes part of the machine." Hayes pressed for details, her recorder capturing every nuance of Delgado's revelation. "Can you be more specific, Sergeant?" "Ma'am, I've seen her diagnose engine problems just by listening to the turbine whine. She can predict mechanical failures days before they happen. And in combat," he paused, struggling with the implications of what he was about to say. "In combat, she doesn't fly the Apache, she inhabits it." Similar testimonies emerged from across the base. Maintenance personnel spoke of modifications she'd made to targeting systems, subtle improvements that enhanced accuracy beyond manufacturer specifications. Pilots who'd flown as her co-pilot described an almost telepathic connection between Vasquez and her aircraft, as if the machine responded to her thoughts rather than her inputs. Captain Morrison, still shaken by the footage revelation, provided the most damaging testimony. "She's been holding back, Colonel. Everything we've seen in training, in standard operations, it's maybe 20% of what she's capable of. That night over Coringal, something changed. The limitations came off." Hayes reviewed the mounting evidence with growing fascination. Vasquez wasn't just an exceptional pilot. She represented something unprecedented in military aviation. The question was whether this anomaly posed a threat or an opportunity. The breakthrough came when Captain Lisa Chen, a flight surgeon who'd conducted Vasquez's medical evaluations, requested a private meeting with the investigation team. Her findings had been classified at a level that even Hayes initially lacked clearance to review. "Colonel, I need you to understand something before we proceed," Chen said, her voice tight with professional concern. "Chief Vasquez isn't just gifted, she's genetically anomalous. Her spatial processing, reaction times, and sensory integration exist outside normal human parameters." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Hayes felt the investigation shifting from disciplinary action toward something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Are you suggesting she's been enhanced somehow, Captain? No, ma'am. I'm suggesting she was born this way. And that footage from Coringal, that's what happens when someone with her capabilities finally stops pretending to be normal. The medical files painted a picture that challenged everything the military thought it knew about human potential. Kira's reflexes tested at levels typically associated with fighter pilots, but her spatial awareness and multitasking abilities exceeded even those exceptional standards. Brain scans revealed neural pathways that processed information with unprecedented efficiency. Dr. Chen's private consultation with Colonel Hayes took place in the base medical facility's most secure conference room. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the classified documentation spread between them, each page revealing another layer of Vasquez's extraordinary capabilities. Her hand-eye coordination measures in the 99.98 percentile, Chen explained, pointing to test results that seemed almost fictional. But more importantly, her ability to process multiple data streams simultaneously is unlike anything we've documented. When she's in an aircraft, her brain essentially merges human intuition with machine precision. Hayes studied the neurological imaging with growing amazement. How long have you known about this, Captain? Since her first medical evaluation 6 years ago. I've been monitoring her condition under direct orders from MEDCOM. This level of genetic variation, it occurs maybe once in 10 million births. The military has been studying her as long as she's been serving. The revelation hit Hayes like a physical blow. Vasquez hadn't been randomly assigned to maintenance. She'd been isolated for study. Her exceptional service record, her call sign, even her current posting had all been carefully orchestrated to observe and document her capabilities while keeping them contained. Who else knows? Hayes demanded. Very few. Her commanding officers have always been briefed on her special status, but most assumed it referred to classified training or psychological factors. Only a handful of people understand the true nature of her condition. Chen pulled up additional files on her secure tablet, revealing years of performance data that told the story of a soldier who'd been forced to hide her true abilities. Training scores deliberately kept within normal ranges, mission reports carefully edited to avoid drawing attention, a career spent in the shadows of her own potential. The Coringal mission changed everything, Chen continued. For the first time, she had to choose between maintaining her cover and saving lives. She chose lives. Hayes began to understand the magnitude of the situation. Vasquez wasn't just an exceptional pilot. She represented an evolutionary leap that the military had been secretly studying for years. The footage that had triggered this investigation was evidence of humanity's next step, captured in the thermal imagery of a desperate nighttime engagement. What are your recommendations, Captain? Chen's expression grew grave. Honestly, Colonel, I'm not sure we have the right to make that decision. She's a person, not a weapon. But the capabilities she demonstrated over Coringal, if other nations develop similar assets or if this genetic variation becomes more common, the implications hung in the air like smoke from distant artillery. Hayes realized she was no longer investigating a simple case of mission irregularities. She was documenting the emergence of something that could reshape the future of warfare itself. Meanwhile, Kira continued her maintenance duties, aware that every conversation, every action was being scrutinized. The investigation had created a bubble of tension around her that even the most junior personnel could sense. Mechanics who'd worked alongside her for months now watched her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She found solace in the familiar rhythms of aircraft maintenance. The Apache she'd been working on when the footage was discovered had become her primary responsibility, its complex systems offering a distraction from the growing scrutiny. As she calibrated the targeting computer, she allowed her mind to process the mounting evidence that her secret was finally out. The morning briefing had been different. Pilots who usually ignored her presence now studied her with calculating eyes, as if trying to reconcile the maintenance chief with the legend emerging from classified testimonies. She could feel their questions, their doubts, their growing realization that they'd been working alongside someone whose capabilities far exceeded their own. Staff Sergeant Delgado approached her workstation with unusual hesitation. After 23 years in the military, he developed an instinct for sensing when situations were about to change dramatically. "Chief, you okay? You've been quiet since this whole thing started." Kiera looked up from the Apache's avionics bay, her dark eyes reflecting a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. "Just focusing on the work, Rico, same as always." But they both knew it wasn't the same. The investigation had cracked open something that couldn't be sealed again. Her carefully constructed facade of normalcy was crumbling, revealing capabilities that would forever change how others saw her. "They're saying things, Chief, about that night in Coringal, about what you did out there." She set down her tools and faced him directly. Delgado had earned the right to honesty through years of loyal service and friendship. "What are they saying, Rico?" "They're saying you're not like other pilots. They're saying maybe you're not like other people." He paused, clearly struggling with the implications. "They're saying you saved 17 soldiers with a broken bird and impossible odds, and that the footage proves things that don't make sense." Kiera felt the weight of years of careful deception pressing down on her. She'd known this day would come eventually, but she'd hoped it would be on her terms, not forced by a technical malfunction that revealed her most classified moment. "Rico, if I told you that everything you think you know about human limitations might be wrong, would you believe me?" His weathered face creased with confusion and something approaching fear. "Chief, I've seen you work, I've seen you fly. I already believe you're something different. Question is, what happens now?" The distant sound of approaching helicopters echoed across the flight line, but for Kiera, the only sound that mattered was the silence that followed his question. She realized that her answer would determine not just her future, but potentially the future of military aviation itself. The Pentagon's involvement became official on day 5 of the investigation. General Rebecca Stone, Director of Advanced Military Applications, arrived with a team of specialists whose security clearances exceeded even Colonel Hayes's considerable access. The investigation had evolved from disciplinary inquiry to strategic evaluation, with implications that reached the highest levels of national security. Kiera was summoned to a new interrogation room, this one equipped with recording devices and monitoring equipment that suggested her physiological responses were now as important as her testimony. General Stone, a compact woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, reviewed her file with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Chief Warrant Officer Vasquez, I'm going to be direct with you," Stone began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We know what you are. We've known for years. What we need to understand is what you intend to do about it." The statement hung between them like a challenge. Kiera had spent her entire career hiding her capabilities, but now faced with someone who knew the truth, she felt an unexpected sense of relief. "Ma'am, I've always intended to serve my country to the best of my abilities while maintaining operational security. Nothing has changed." Stone smiled, but it wasn't entirely friendly. "Chief, operational security assumes the enemy doesn't know what you're capable of. That assumption no longer applies. The footage from Coringal has been analyzed by every major intelligence agency in the world. They know we have someone who can perform impossible feats in combat aircraft." The revelation struck Kiera like a physical blow. She'd assumed the investigation was internal, a matter of military discipline and protocol. The reality was far more serious. Her secret had become an international security issue. How many people have seen the footage, ma'am? Enough to change the strategic balance in several theaters of operation. Every hostile nation is now wondering if we have more assets like you, and every allied nation is wondering if we've been holding back capabilities during joint operations. Stone pulled up a classified briefing on her tablet, showing satellite imagery of military installations around the world. Chinese aircraft development has accelerated dramatically in the past week. Russian pilot training programs have been expanded. The Iranians are requesting advanced helicopter technology from their suppliers. Your performance over Korangal has triggered an arms race. Kira felt the weight of global consequences settling on her shoulders. Her decision to save 17 soldiers had inadvertently revealed capabilities that enemies would now work to counter and allies would demand to access. General, I never intended for this to become public knowledge. Intentions don't matter anymore, Chief. What matters is how we handle the situation from here. We have three options: deny everything and reassign you to complete obscurity, admit to having enhanced assets and deal with the diplomatic consequences, or, she paused, studying Kira's reaction carefully. We use this opportunity to change the nature of warfare itself. The third option terrified and intrigued Kira in equal measure. General Stone's proposal would transform her from a hidden asset into the prototype for an entirely new class of military personnel. The briefing room fell silent as she processed the implications of what was being offered. Ma'am, are you suggesting I become some kind of test pilot for experimental programs? Stone leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. I'm suggesting you stop hiding who you are and start teaching others how to approach your level of capability. Not everyone can match your genetic advantages, but most pilots are operating far below their potential because they don't understand what's possible. The proposal involved establishing a new training facility, one designed to push the boundaries of human performance in military aviation. Kira would lead the program, developing techniques and technologies that maximize the interface between pilot and aircraft. Her unique capabilities would become the baseline for a new generation of combat aviators. The program would be classified at the highest levels, Stone continued. Officially, you'd be conducting advanced systems testing. Unofficially, you'd be revolutionizing how we think about human-machine integration in combat environments. Kira thought about the pilots she'd known throughout her career, good people who'd never reached their full potential because they'd been taught to accept limitations that might not actually exist. The idea of helping them break through those barriers was appealing, but she understood the risks involved. What about the international implications, ma'am? Won't this program confirm what our enemies suspect about enhanced capabilities? Chief, they already know. The question is whether we lead the development of these technologies or play catch-up while others advance beyond our capabilities. Stone's voice carried the weight of strategic inevitability. This isn't about creating super soldiers. It's about understanding and developing human potential that already exists. The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Hayes entering with urgent classified communications. The situation had escalated beyond the confines of Bagram Airfield. Intelligence agencies reported increased reconnaissance activity around American military installations, and several nations had initiated programs specifically designed to identify and recruit pilots with exceptional abilities. General, we're receiving requests from Allied commanders asking about the authenticity of the footage. How do you want me to respond? Stone studied the communications with growing concern. The secret was spreading faster than they'd anticipated, and the window for controlling the narrative was rapidly closing. Kira realized that her decision would determine not just her own future, but potentially the course of military aviation development worldwide. Chief, I need an answer. Will you help us stay ahead of this curve, or do we proceed without your expertise? Kira looked out the small window at the flight line, where Apache helicopters sat in neat rows, their crews unaware that everything was about to change. Her answer would transform not just her life, but the lives of every pilot who came after her. Her decision came during the pre-dawn hours of the sixth day, as she stood on the flight line watching the sunrise paint the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The Apache she'd been maintaining sat nearby, its weapons systems gleaming in the early light, a machine that had become an extension of her will during that fateful night over Quarangle. "I'll do it," she told General Stone during their morning briefing, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the commitment. "But I have conditions." Stone raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to negotiations from warrant officers, but gestured for her to continue. "First, any pilot who enters the program does so voluntarily, with full knowledge of the risks and implications. Second, the techniques we develop remain focused on maximizing human potential, not creating dependencies on technology or enhancement. Third, I maintain operational command of the training protocols." "Those are reasonable conditions, Chief. Anything else?" Kira thought about Staff Sergeant Delgado, about Captain Morrison, about all the people who'd worked alongside her without knowing the truth. "I want to choose my initial team, people who have worked with me, who understand that exceptional performance comes from dedication and training, not just genetic advantages." Stone nodded approval. "We'll need to establish the facility quickly. Current intelligence suggests that other nations are accelerating their own programs based on analysis of your footage. How soon can you be ready to begin operations?" "Ma'am, I've been ready my entire career. I just didn't know it." The administrative machinery of the military moved with surprising speed once the decision was made. Within hours, orders were being issued, personnel files reviewed, and a remote facility in Nevada was being prepared for the most classified training program in military aviation history. Kira spent her final day at Bagram saying goodbye to the people and places that had shaped her understanding of service and sacrifice. The Apache she'd been maintaining would remain behind, but the lessons learned from their partnership would travel with her to whatever came next. Staff Sergeant Delgado approached her as she packed her personal equipment, his expression mixing pride with concern. "Chief, whatever this new assignment is, you remember that you earned everything through hard work and dedication. Don't let them make you forget that." She clasped his shoulder, feeling the weight of years of friendship and mentorship. "Rico, some of us are just built different. That doesn't make us better or worse, just different. The goal is to help others find their own version of different." As the transport helicopter lifted off from Bagram Airfield, Kira watched the familiar landscape disappear below. She was leaving behind the life of careful concealment that had defined her military career, but she was also embracing the opportunity to help others discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. The mountains of Afghanistan faded into the distance, but the lessons learned in their shadows would shape the future of military aviation for generations to come. The Nevada facility materialized from the desert like something from a classified dream. Area 51's neighbor, officially designated as Advanced Combat Systems Testing Site 7, had been constructed in total secrecy over the previous 18 months. General Stone had been planning for this moment longer than Kira had realized, waiting for the right catalyst to launch a program that would redefine human potential in combat aviation. Kira's first glimpse of the facility came as her transport crested a ridge of desert mountains, revealing a complex of hangars and training buildings that seemed to blur the line between cutting-edge technology and science fiction. The airfield accommodated everything from conventional helicopters to aircraft she didn't recognize, their angular profiles suggesting capabilities that pushed the boundaries of current technology. "Welcome to Project Shadowfax," General Stone said as they deplaned onto the pristine tarmac. "Named after your call sign, Chief. This is where we discover what's possible when human potential meets unlimited resources." The name sent a chill through Kira that had nothing to do with the desert air. Her call sign, chosen years ago during her first combat deployment, had reflected her ability to appear and disappear in combat zones with ghostly precision. Now it represented something far more significant, humanity's next step in the evolution of warfare. Her quarters were Spartanly functional but comfortable, with a view of the training facilities that would become her domain. The window looked out on a landscape that seemed to stretch forever, empty desert that provided perfect isolation for activities that couldn't be observed by curious eyes or foreign satellites. The first members of her hand-picked team began arriving within days. Staff Sergeant Delgado had volunteered immediately when offered the opportunity, bringing his decades of maintenance experience to a program that would push aircraft beyond their design specifications. Captain Morrison, still shaken by his encounter with the footage, arrived with a combination of fear and fascination that made him perfect for understanding the psychological aspects of exceptional performance. Dr. Chen's assignment was the most crucial. Her medical expertise would be essential for understanding the physiological demands of the training protocols Kira intended to develop. More importantly, her years of studying Kira's unique capabilities provided the scientific foundation for everything they hoped to accomplish. The initial briefings were conducted in a secure conference room deep within the main facility. Maps covered the walls, but they weren't geographic. They were neurological charts, performance matrices, and capability assessments that treated human potential like a territory to be explored and conquered. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kira began, facing the small group that would form the core of Project Shadowfax, "everything you think you know about the limits of human performance in combat aviation is probably wrong. Our job is to prove it." The silence that followed was filled with possibility and apprehension in equal measure. They were about to embark on a journey into uncharted territory, guided by someone whose own capabilities challenged everything they thought they understood about the relationship between human and machine. The first phase of training began with something deceptively simple, learning to truly listen to an aircraft. Kira stood beside an Apache helicopter in the main hangar, its systems powered down, its weapons removed, transformed from instrument of war into teaching tool. Before you can transcend limitations, you have to understand what those limitations actually are, she told the 6 pilots who comprised the initial test group. They were volunteers from various branches of service, each selected for psychological resilience and exceptional baseline capabilities, though none approached Kira's extraordinary standards. Lieutenant Maria Santos, a Marine Corps aviator with over 200 combat hours, raised her hand. "Ma'am, with respect, we all know how to conduct pre-flight inspections and system diagnostics. How is this different from standard training?" Kira smiled, recognizing her younger self in the lieutenant's confident skepticism. "Santos, put your hand on the engine cowling and tell me what you feel." Santos complied, placing her palm against the metal surface. "I feel metal, room temperature, maybe some residual vibration from other aircraft operations." "Now close your eyes and really listen. Not just to the obvious sounds, but to the harmonics, the undertones, the spaces between sounds." The hangar fell silent except for the distant hum of base operations. Santos frowned, concentrating, trying to perceive whatever Kira wanted her to discover. After several minutes, her expression changed. There's something, like a frequency just at the edge of hearing, and the metal feels different, warmer in some places, cooler in others." "Good. What you're beginning to sense is the aircraft's baseline state. Every machine has its own signature, its own way of communicating its condition. Most pilots never learn to recognize these subtleties because they rely entirely on instruments and standard procedures. Over the following weeks, the pilots learned to diagnose problems that instruments couldn't detect, to sense mechanical issues hours or days before they became critical failures. But more importantly, they began to understand that the barrier between human and machine was far more permeable than they'd ever imagined. Captain David Reeves, an Army aviator with a background in special operations, was the first to achieve what Kira called integration, a state where pilot and aircraft functioned as a single system rather than human operating machine. His description of the experience was both illuminating and unsettling. "It's like the helicopter becomes part of your body," he explained during a debriefing session. "You don't think about collective and cyclic inputs. You think about going somewhere and the aircraft responds. But it's more than that. You start anticipating mechanical issues because you feel them in your bones." Dr. Chen monitored every aspect of the training, documenting physiological changes that traditional aviation medicine hadn't anticipated. Brain scans revealed new neural pathways forming as pilots learned to process information from sources they'd never consciously accessed. Heart rate variability patterns showed unprecedented synchronization between human and machine rhythms during flight operations. The breakthrough came during the program's 8th week, when Lieutenant Santos achieved something that defied conventional understanding of helicopter performance. During a routine training flight, her Apache began experiencing hydraulic pressure fluctuations that should have forced an immediate emergency landing. Instead of following standard procedures, Santos entered the integration state Kira had been teaching and began compensating for the mechanical failure through subtle adjustments that shouldn't have been possible. She landed safely after completing the full training exercise, the helicopter performing maneuvers that its technical specifications said were impossible under the existing conditions. "How did you know to compensate that way?" Kira asked during the post-flight debrief. Santos looked confused, as if she wasn't entirely sure herself. "Ma'am, I didn't think about it consciously. I just felt what the aircraft needed and provided it, like the helicopter was telling me how to help it." The incident was documented and analyzed from every possible angle. The hydraulic failure was real and significant, but Santos had managed to maintain precise control through corrections that required split-second timing and an intuitive understanding of aerodynamics that went beyond standard training. General Stone, who had been observing the program's progress from afar, arrived the next day for a comprehensive briefing. The preliminary results exceeded even her optimistic projections, but they also raised questions about the scalability and implications of what Project Shadowfax was accomplishing. "Chief, what we're seeing here goes beyond advanced training techniques," she said during their private meeting. "We're documenting the emergence of capabilities that approach what you demonstrated over Korangal. How do we explain this to oversight committees who don't believe in human enhancement?" Kira had been wrestling with the same question. The pilots weren't being enhanced through technology or pharmaceuticals. They were simply learning to access capabilities that had always existed but had never been properly developed. "General, I think we're not creating new abilities. We're removing artificial limitations that traditional training imposes. Every pilot has the potential for integration, but most never discover it because they're taught to rely on external systems rather than developing their own perceptual abilities." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Pentagon. Intelligence agencies had detected increased electromagnetic reconnaissance activity around the Nevada facility, suggesting that foreign powers were attempting to gather information about Project Shadowfax despite its classified status. "Ma'am, how much do they know?" Kira asked. Stone's expression grew grim. "Enough to be concerned. We may need to accelerate the program timeline and begin operational deployment sooner than planned." The isolation that had protected Project Shadowfax was becoming a liability. The world was changing faster than their carefully controlled training environment could accommodate, and Kira realized that her pilots might soon face challenges that no amount of simulation could prepare them for. The first operational deployment came sooner than anyone expected. A hostage rescue operation in Syria required capabilities that conventional aviation couldn't provide: precision insertion into heavily defended urban terrain, with civilian casualties absolutely prohibited, and enemy forces equipped with advanced air defense systems. Kira found herself facing the decision she'd hoped to avoid: releasing her partially trained pilots into combat situations that would test the limits of their newly developed abilities. The integration techniques they'd mastered in controlled conditions would now face the ultimate validation of real-world application. "Ma'am, they're not ready for this level of complexity," she told General Stone during the emergency briefing. "We've had 12 weeks of training, not the 18 months I originally recommended." Stone spread tactical maps across the conference table, highlighting the target location and surrounding threat environment. "Chief, intelligence indicates that the hostages will be moved within 72 hours to a location we can't penetrate. This is our only opportunity." The rescue target was a compound in Aleppo, surrounded by civilian infrastructure and defended by militants using sophisticated shoulder-fired missiles. Conventional approaches had been rejected as too risky, but two Apache helicopters operating with integrated pilots might be able to thread the needle between tactical effectiveness and collateral damage avoidance. Lieutenant Santos and Captain Reeves volunteered immediately, their confidence in the integration techniques outweighing their concerns about operational readiness. Dr. Chen conducted final medical evaluations, documenting stress responses that suggested the pilots had internalized the training more completely than standard assessments could measure. "Chief, we can do this," Santos said during the final briefing. "The integration isn't just about flying better, it's about understanding the mission at a level that makes impossible situations possible." Kira felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like armor. She would lead the mission personally, flying the third Apache in what would be Project Shadowfax's debut in actual combat. Everything they'd learned about human potential would be tested against an enemy that wouldn't care about training protocols or theoretical capabilities. The flight to Syria took place during a moonless night, 3 helicopters moving across desert terrain with navigation lights extinguished and communications limited to essential tactical data. Kira felt the familiar sensation of integration taking hold, her consciousness expanding to encompass not just her own aircraft, but the entire formation moving through hostile airspace. As they approached the target area, she realized that Project Shadowfax was no longer an experimental program. It was about to become the future of military aviation, proven in the crucible of combat or discredited by failure. The hostages' lives depended on capabilities that existed at the very edge of human possibility, guided by pilots who'd learned to transcend the limitations that had defined warfare for generations. The integration was complete, the mission had begun, and the world was about to discover what happened when human potential met unlimited possibility in the darkness above a hostile city. The compound appeared in their thermal imaging systems like a glowing maze of concrete and steel, surrounded by the heat signatures of civilian buildings that made precision strikes nearly impossible. Intelligence estimates suggested 47 militants defending the location, armed with weapons that could destroy conventional aircraft at distances that precluded safe rescue operations. Kira's voice came across the tactical frequency with crystalline clarity. "Shadowfax 2 and 3, initiate integration protocols. We're going to thread the needle." Santos and Reeves acknowledged with simple confirmations, but Kira could sense their mental state shifting as they entered the profound connection between human consciousness and machine capability that Project Shadowfax had developed. Their helicopters began moving with fluid precision that defied the mechanical nature of their construction. The first challenge came from unexpected directions. Shoulder-fired missiles launched from rooftops that hadn't appeared in the intelligence briefings. Conventional evasive maneuvers would have been too slow, but integrated pilots could sense the incoming threats before their instruments registered the launches. Santos's Apache rolled inverted and dove between buildings with clearances measured in feet, the missile passing harmlessly through empty air, while she maintained perfect positioning for the insertion team she carried. Her helicopter moved like a living thing, anticipating obstacles and threats through sensory input that traditional training couldn't access. Reeves faced a different challenge, militants using the hostages building as a shield.